Hey guys, what's up? It is the one and only RJ21, and today I'm going to be recapping the events of week 1 of Big Brother Canada 12 and giving my first power rankings of the season. Week 1 starts off with the 12 new house guests moving into the Big Brother Canada 12 house, unaware of the fact that 2 All-Stars would be joining them later on in the night. While the 12 house guests get ready for their first competition of the season, the All-Stars are revealed to be the runner-up of Big Brother Canada 7 in Anthony and the first juror from Big Brother Canada 9 in Victoria. Now, not only are they the only 2 house guests to be All-Stars and returning to the house, they would get immunity for the entirety of week 1, and they would be the only ones eligible to compete for the first head of household competition. So then, what are the 12 new house guests competing for? Once Victoria and Anthony move into the Big Brother Canada house, it is revealed that the 12 new house guests are not competing for HOH, but are rather competing for safety, where the last person hanging onto the rope would not only gain safety for the entirety of week 1, they would also get first pick at their entourage. More on that later. The competition went on for a bit, and Lexus ended up winning the competition, gaining safety for the entirety of week 1 and getting first pick at her entourage. Now Lexus, along with Bayleigh, Dinis, Donna, Elijah, and Vivek all joined Anthony's entourage, while Avery, Janine, Matthew, Todd, and Tola all joined Victoria's entourage. We then get to the first head of household competition, and it is revealed what the entourage twist is. Whichever All-Star wins the head of household competition will keep their entire entourage safe, while the All-Star that loses the first head of household competition will leave their entire entourage vulnerable. The head of household competition was essentially a who knows their entourage the best. It was also like a modified majority rules type beat, and Anthony ends up winning it, becoming the first head of household of the season and him winning his first HOH competition ever, leaving Victoria's entire entourage to be vulnerable. It's then revealed that Anthony wants to target Janine because Janine is the only person that he perceives as not being able to work with or control later on down the road, making her a big threat in his eyes. So, come the first nomination ceremony of the season, Anthony targets and nominates Avery and Janine, with Avery being the pawn and Janine being the target. Now, Avery and Janine, along with Tola, Dinis, and Matthew, are all selected to compete in the first power veto competition of the season. It's essentially a modified version of the black box, where the house guests have to dig into their burrows and find both their puzzle pieces and the puzzle board. Once they get all their puzzle pieces, they have to memorize and feel around a puzzle board and then must replicate it with their puzzle pieces. The first house guest to do this will win the first power veto of the season. Now, it was a close race between Dinis and Janine, but at the end of the day, Dinis came out with the win, winning the first power veto of the season. Now, despite Janine campaigning like hell for Dinis to use the power veto on her, at the nomination ceremony, her pleas fell on deaf ears as Dinis chose not to use the power veto, leaving the nominations the same. Now, Janine campaigned and tried to stay in the house, but it was all for naught, as come eviction night, Janine was the first house guest to be evicted from the Big Brother Canada 12 house by a vote of 11-0. Before we get into the power ranking, just a quick disclaimer. This part of the video in the past is what I would usually dedicate to the house dynamics, where I try and lay out the overall layout of the house and try explaining like who's in power and whatnot. But I've come to realize that it's a bit unnecessary because I'm going in depth talking about each of the individual house guests. And so I understand that it is getting a little bit redundant and repetitive repeating the house dynamics. So I've just decided to cut out that section entirely. And in addition to that, in the past, I based my power rankings based off of all of the information I had, even if I recorded the video way after the eviction of the week. And I've realized that that really does skew some results. So I've decided that no matter when I record them, I'm only going to be basing my power rankings based off of all of the information from that specific week. So even though this video is being recorded when there is information available for week 2, I'm only basing these power rankings off of the information provided from week 1. Hopefully that makes sense, and hopefully it clarifies a lot of things. But with all of that preamble out of the way, let's get into the first power ranking of the season. At number 14, the most recently evicted house guest, we have Janine. And it's honestly really sad to lose Janine this early. You could tell that she is a super fan and that she wanted to be in that house so badly. And it's really unfortunate to see a super fan's dreams get cut so short. I really do think that she got the short end of the stick. I think her nomination, from Anthony's perspective, was completely justifiable. But from her perspective, she had absolutely no say in her getting nominated. I don't even think she actively did anything to Anthony to make Anthony believe that she is a threat. It's just based off of Anthony's perceptions. And because Janine was like one of the only people who wasn't willing to bend over and immediately just plead their allegiance to him, that came off as a threat to him, and she was targeted accordingly. I will say, though, that in her exit interview, when she does get evicted with Arissa, she does claim that she tried everything she could to try and stay in the house, even though we know that that's not true, because she did have a lot of information she could have dealt out, with Victoria basically leaking that she was the one who essentially blew up the All Girls Alliance and throwing Janine under the bus. So it is a little bit questionable how much she actually fought to stay in the house. And not only that, she essentially went scorched earth on Vivek's game, essentially blaming him for the reason that she went up on the block without ever confirming with anybody, not even herself, that Vivek was the one. She just kind of blew it out of proportions and based it off an assumption. And I feel like that's not necessarily the best way to leave the house. It does make her come off a little bit indignant and not taking accountability for her actions. I mean, to be fair, she didn't really have, there weren't really any actions for her to take accountability for. But in terms of her campaigning and staying in the house, her blaming it on just it, as soon as Anthony said I was the target, it was over and I couldn't do anything else, I feel like it does come off as a little bit not the best, in the sense that she's kind of taken absolutely no accountability for why she left when she could have campaigned a lot harder. Even though it would have been a really tough road, there was definitely a pathway that she could have found to try and escape this week. But the fact that she wasn't willing to try and find it and kind of just resolute in the fact that she was going to be going home when she lost the veto was kind of unfortunate. But that's Janine's game, and in all honesty, I really wouldn't want her to come back for a future season. I don't think she was particularly the most interesting, but she was fine for what she did on this season, and she's the first house guest evicted from the Big Brother Canada 12 house, leaving her here at number 14. Now it's time to get to the house guest actually still in the house. At number 13, the person that is currently in the worst position, and my preseason winner pick, we have Vivek. And I don't think I've ever been more wrong about a house guest in the preseason than I was with Vivek. I really thought that with how big of a super fan Vivek was, he was going to at least know how to manage his relationships in the early weeks and how to solidify a really solid foundation for himself before moving forward. But he was all over the place this week. He was talking to everybody but connecting with nobody. And that made him come off as really shady and really slimy. And it's just sowing a lot of mistrust with a lot of the people in the house. Even the people that he made really solid bonds with in the beginning, like Tola, he ditched those because he didn't see them as necessary or useful to his game. And now he's in the worst position in the house, where he is the easy house target for basically all of the women. He's the target for the All-Stars in Anthony and Victoria, and he isn't really closely aligned with the guys. So he's essentially fighting a one-man battle against the entire house. If he doesn't win this next HOH, he's basically screwed. And if he doesn't win the veto, he's for sure going home, unless some big move happens where he's able to flip the house to keep him to stay. But it's week 2, so how likely is that to happen? I don't really see it happening, and I don't even know if Vivek has the caliber of skill necessary to pull off a flip that big. I think Vivek is screwed. As much as I hate to say it, I want to have more faith in my preseason winner pick, but he was definitely looking a lot better in the preseason than he is now. I think he's just falling victim to the BB Can superfan status, where he's trying to play 10 weeks worth of gameplay in just one, and it's really blowing up his position. And I really don't see any way for him to escape this situation unless he wins a competition to keep himself safe. But that's a really fragile position for him to be in. It's really circumstantial, and it's going to be really interesting to see if he can survive this. But if not, he's probably going to be the next person going home, which is why I have him here at number 13. At number 12, I have Tola, and he almost went home this week. He was almost the first boot. Like, he almost went up on the block as the pawn, and the women would have flipped the vote on him, and he would have gone home. Even when Tola wasn't put up, all of the women were banding together to try and get the veto to be used on one of the women, so Tola would go up and Tola would go home. It's just a testament to how bad he's playing this game. He's actively talking about how he doesn't want to throw people under the bus and how he just wants to be himself, and that's his strategy. His strategy is him being himself. Like, what is this man thinking? What are you doing? Like, are you serious? Come on. His strategy is just having a decent social game, and he's not even doing that. He's making no efforts to connect with a majority of the women in the house. He's mostly just sticking to his boys and his bros and like Anthony and like Todd. Like, he's really not building anything, and it's absolutely ruining his position. And he's probably going to get put up as a pawn next to Vivek if one of the women wins HOH next week. Now, to be fair, Tola could win HOH, but even if he did win HOH, I have no idea who he would even target, because he's just that averse to talking game with anybody except for his boys, which definitely sucks for him, and it is actively ruining his position. There's really like nothing positive to say about his game except that he isn't the primary target coming into week 2. He's just the pawn. But if Vivek wins that veto, he's most likely going home, which is horrible for him because he would be going home. And because there's literally nothing good I can say about his game besides not being the house target, I have to keep him here at number 12. At number 11, I have Todd. And there is just nothing to say about this dude. He is getting so little content on both the shows and the digital dailies. Like, he is getting no focus whatsoever, and I have no idea or no true sense of what his position is in the house. He just seems to be existing. Like, it's shown that he has a somewhat decent relationship with Matthew and Anthony, and it is shown on the digital dailies that he does have a somewhat decent relationship with Tola, but outside of that, he's pretty much a non-factor in the house. He's not really talking strategy. He's kind of just like existing. Like, he's just kind of a body in the house, and he's not really doing anything. Like anything of worth, he's not doing. And that sucks. I don't want to say it, but he's kind of flopping. He's kind of not giving much, both on the entertainment and on the strategy side. Like, he's not really giving anything. And because he's been so passive in this first week, this game is just speeding right by him. There are circumstances where playing an under-the-radar and low-key game would work out for him. However, on this specific cast and in Big Brother Canada in general, it doesn't work like that. Playing an under-the-radar slow-burn game doesn't work in Big Brother Canada. And it's not even entirely sure if he's doing that intentionally. He could just be lazing around just because he's lazing around. He's not doing anything to help or hurt his game. And because he's not doing anything, it's hurting his game more than anything. And because of his lack of agency and his lack of alliances and his lack of anything, I have to keep him here at number 11. At number 10, I have Dinis. And despite winning the first power veto competition of the season, he's still in a pretty poor position. With winning the first power veto or just a competition in week 1 in general, it should usually grant the winner a lot of agency and a lot of positioning power. However, he does nothing with it. Winning that veto did nothing for his game. If anything, it actively ruined it. If he would have not won the veto, Janine would have won it. She would have taken herself off. Tola would have most likely gone up and gone home. And now Dinis has a solid ally in Janine. Like, it would have been perfect for him. But he wanted to win a competition just so he could say he won a competition. He's thinking of his resume in week 1. This is like a 10-week season, and he's thinking of building his resume in week 1. That just shows that he's thinking way too long term, and he's not even focusing on the short term. He's not even going to make it long term because of how poor his short term position is. He has no real allies. He doesn't have any allegiances to anybody. He's kind of like a floater in the house. He's kind of like just a body, but at least he's a more useful and social body than somebody like a Todd and a Tola. Like, he's actually actively socializing with people, but he's not building any genuine alliances or true like loyalties to anybody. And now he has nothing to show for it. Moving forward, he's probably going to be a perpetual pawn. And that's going to be horrible for him because eventually he's going to get picked off when the numbers are just no longer on his side. So that doesn't give me the best prospects for him in the future, but hopefully he can turn it around. He does have some social skills that could play to his favor, but overall, I just don't have any confidence in where he's at right now, which is why I have to leave him here at number 10. At number 9, I have Elijah. And Elijah's in a very similar position to Dinis and Todd in the sense that he isn't being targeted, but he's not being included in anything. Now, there is a clip of him making an alliance with Avery and Victoria called the Directors, and supposedly that's a 7-person alliance, but we can tell from how Avery and Victoria are talking about the alliance that it isn't a real alliance in their eyes, which means that Elijah's probably only being included in that alliance for the sake of getting numbers. Once Janine leaves the house, it's going to be 13 people, and 7 people is the majority. So bringing Elijah in as solely a number and a vote over like actual any like worth is definitely not a good place for him to be. Outside of that, we really don't know anything about Elijah's game. I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure he didn't get any confessionals about game or house life throughout this entire week. Despite it being like 5 episodes, he doesn't get like any confessionals talking about himself or his position in the game, and I don't really have any good sense about where he is in the game. I can just naturally assume that he's not being included in much because if he was, it would be talked about to some capacity, but it's not, meaning that Elijah's being not excluded, but just not included in anything, and that's horrible for his game. Similar to Dinis, I think Elijah could be a very easy pawn moving forward in the future that is eventually going to get picked off. I don't know if Elijah even has the skills to pull that off, but the fact that he is being included in some sort of alliance does give me some hopes for his game, but not too much, which is why I have him here at number 9. At number 8, I have Matthew. And if you've been keeping track, you'll notice that every single player I've talked about so far has been a man. And that's because the men of this cast are flopping like fish. They are giving absolutely nothing, both in entertainment and in gameplay. They're just not doing anything. The women of this house are running circles around them. I have no idea why. They're just kind of sitting there and just letting the game pass them by. And I feel like that's what's happening with Matthew. I feel like Matthew is in the best position out of all of the guys because he is shown being included in a lot more stuff. He is shown to have a pretty solid relationship with the boys in Anthony and Todd and Tola. He's also shown having a pretty good relationship with Lexus, which does build him some solid inroads in the future with some of the women. However, that is making him a target in the short term, as if one of the women do win HOH, there is a high possibility that Matthew and Lexus might get put up against each other to try and split up the flirtmance, and in that circumstance Matthew would more likely than not go home unless the women want to flip on Lexus, but because it's so early on I just don't see that happening, so Matthew's probably screwed in that sense. But outside of that, Matthew really doesn't have anything to show for his game. He's not really in a good position. The alliances he has are just more so like, hey, I got you, I'll protect you if I can. Like, it's nothing serious. He doesn't have anything serious established. Maybe in a couple weeks he can solidify those bonds and they can turn those personal bonds into real solid game relationships, but that's going to take some time for him, and he might get sniped out sooner rather than later if the women get in power and see him as a big enough threat to take out. So because of all of that, I have to leave him here at number 8. At number 7, we're finally talking about a woman in the house, but here I have Donna. And Donna's in a really precarious position because she's fully going with this all women's alliance. Like, she wants the big sisters to be the final six at this point. She wants them to all work together until the end, but the chances of that happening are very minute, especially with some of the women that are in this alliance. It's just not going to happen. And she got really lucky this week. Like, she was the figurehead of a lot of the anti-veteran and the pro-women sentiments that are spreading throughout the house. If Victoria were in power, Donna would have been vulnerable to go home, and she probably wouldn't have been targeted, but Anthony definitely would have tried to get her on the block. It wasn't going to happen, but there's a possibility of that happening in general, and that's really bad in terms of prospects for her future in the game. She does have solid allies around her, right? She does have some of the women around her, but she's unaware of the fact that some of the women in her alliance are working with men. Like, she's completely oblivious to the fact that that's even a possibility. People like Lexus, Avery, Victoria, and Kayla are all already trying to spread out and trying to interact with some of the men. And she's so strong in wanting to stick with the women that it's ruining her chances of spreading out and getting any sort of relationships outside of that. And even within the women, she's being targeted because she keeps talking about how some of the women talking with the guys, like Lexus, is actively bad for them and that she would put them up. And that's ruining her position, where she's now actually a target in some of the women's eyes. Somebody like Alexis or a Kayla might put her up on the block and try and take her out if the circumstances are right, which is not very good for her game. Now, it is interesting that Donna does get so much screen time on the season. Like, she's essentially like a secondary narrator to the veterans. It's really interesting to see how much content she gets, which shows that like production really wants her to at least do well because they are propping her up so much. So that maybe that does show some signs that she's in a decent position, but it's a very precarious one at that, and I have to leave her here at number 7. At number 6, I have Bayleigh. And even though Bayleigh is number 6 out of 14 on this list, she's still not in a good position. Rarely anybody in this house is in a good position. Bayleigh is in one of the most interesting positions alongside Donna, in that Bayleigh, even more so than Donna, is really sticking with this all women's alliance. She's almost like a man hater in the house, and she really doesn't like interacting with most of the dudes, and she's hating some of the women who are even thinking of interacting with the dudes. Like, Bayleigh had an almost irrational hate against Tola in week 1 and how badly she wanted him to not only go up but go home. And now it's shown that Bayleigh is really against Lexus because Lexus is flirting with Matthew and just interacting with Matthew a lot. And now Bayleigh wants to target Lexus because of that. I think Bayleigh is oblivious to her position within the women. I think she thinks that she's the glue friend of all of the women and that like she's the binding factor keeping them all together, and that's putting her in a power position, when in actuality a majority of the women in the Big Sisters Alliance have already jumped ship and tried interacting with dudes in the house, but Bayleigh is just unaware of the fact that that could even happen. Like, she is so grounded and focused on getting an all women, like all these women to the end, that she's probably going to get targeted earlier than not. If any strong dude wins HOH in the future, whether it be somebody like Anthony or Todd or Matthew, Bayleigh is probably the number 1 target on their list out of all of the women, because she's made it so apparent how much she doesn't want to work with the men, and that's horrible for her position. Now, it's entertaining as hell. Like, it's so funny watching this, and she's giving great diary rooms and confessionals, but in terms of her game, it doesn't really spell out that well for her, and I am concerned for her longevity in the game. However, she's not an immediate target on anybody's radar, and she does have some pretty solid allies behind her. So with all of that in mind, I am going to keep her here at number 6. At number 5, the final guy in the house, I have Anthony. And even though Anthony claims that he had a textbook perfect first HOH, it really wasn't. Like, I don't know if Anthony was fully vaccinated coming into this house, because he caught a really bad case of HOH-itis. Like, he was cocky, and he was essentially just telling people what he wanted. Like, he points at Janine and says, "You're the target, you're going home." And to be fair, it is the first HOH, so he does have the privilege of being able to do that because nobody wants to rock the boat in week 1 at least, but it's still not good. Like, he doesn't come out of this HOH in as good of a position as he thinks. He thinks that he has a really solid connection with a lot of the women and a lot of the men, when in actuality, he was a pretty big target from some of the women. Somebody like Bayleigh really wants Anthony gone. Like, if Bayleigh wins this upcoming HOH, I believe that Anthony and Matthew are going to be going up on the block. And Anthony, even though he's not going home, it's still not great that he's being targeted, and he's oblivious to the fact that he could be targeted. I think he is just getting overconfident. He was definitely getting cocky and a little bit stagnant in his gameplay because he was not only HOH, but even if he didn't win, he was still going to be safe. So he was able to just kind of sit back and relax and not really have to worry about much, when in actuality, he really needed to work on building bonds and good inroads with a lot of the women in power. And to be fair, he has done that with the Hot Chocolates Alliance, but he thinks that he's within the core of that, when in actuality, it's more so like the 4 women and him because they need somebody to win competitions. Like, once they get down to Final 5, if Anthony doesn't win a competition, he's going home. Like, Anthony literally has to comp out in order to get to the end. And we saw on his original season that he's not exactly the best competitor. Like, there was a lot of people on his season who outclassed him, like Dane and Adam. And on this season, there could probably be a lot of people who could outclass him in competitions again. Even on the women's side, who he is somewhat underestimating and somewhat undervaluing, which is really bad for his game. If he continues to underestimate people in this game, it's going to catch up with him and he's going to be going home early. But to be fair, he does have really solid allies around him. He actually has genuine alliances in like the Hot Chocolates. So because of all of that, I have to put him here at number 5. At number 4, I have Lexus. And I am so mad I didn't pick her as my preseason winner pick. I saw the Taylor Hale coded within her, and I was so close to picking her, but I didn't. And now I'm like punching the air, wishing that I did pick her because she's doing a really good job in the house. She's actually meeting my expectations and how I thought she was going to do as a player, because socially, she's doing a great job. Like, she's building really solid connections with everybody, both on the women and the men's side. And even though her connections with some of the men are tainting her relationships with some of the women, she still has a really solid position. She still has the big sisters, even though they are basically imploding on themselves. She has the Hot Chocolates, which she is a critical member of, and she has a really solid relationship with Matthew, meaning if Matthew were to win an HOH, she would most likely have the most influence on his HOH, essentially being the brains behind their operation, which spells really good for her prospects in the future. My only concern is that if some of the women like Donna or Bayleigh were to win an HOH and Anthony couldn't be targeted, or any of the strong men could be targeted, Lexus is going to be in a very precarious position because there is that budding flirtmance between herself and Matthew, and that could spell really bad news for her because she could go up, and if Matthew wins the veto, she could go home. Is that going to happen though? Most likely not, because I think Lexus really does have a lot of solid connections within the house that could keep her safe, but that is a blind spot in her game that I'm not quite sure she recognizes. I think Lexus just is doing a really good job at socializing with people. And like she said in the preseason, she's really going to focus on building those bonds early on. And I think it's going to have long-term benefits for her as long as she can keep them steady and not have any of them blow up in her face, or not let any of them get too bad like with Donna or with Bayleigh. I think she could do really well, and I think she could go really far, which is why I have her here at number 4. At number 3, I have Kayla, and I'm really impressed with Kayla. In the preseason, I wasn't really that high on her because I really didn't see that much game knowledge or game sense within her, but she's doing a really good job at like aligning herself with people and just building really good bonds. She's kind of like a better version of Lexus in that she's building really solid connections with people on both the women and the men's side of the house. She has really solid connections in that, but she's not getting caught. and she's not getting called out for it like Lexus is. The women in Donna and Bayleigh are actively campaigning against Lexus without even knowing that Kayla is doing the same thing, which is just great for her position. Kayla also has a really solid connection with Victoria and Anthony, and with them being the power vets and the power players on the season right now, she's definitely not going to be going home anytime soon. Unless some like big twist completely screws her out of the game, I really don't see her going home anytime soon. She has really, really good prospects. She has I think she has a lot of longevity in her. I think she can go the distance. I think she has a lot of the connections that she needs to go far. I think that she can win the competitions necessary to keep herself safe. I think she has everything she needs right now in her hands. It's just a matter of expanding that power outwards without getting caught. We're shown that Kayla has really good bonds with people like Avery, and those solid one-on-one connections are going to bring her far in this game. And I mean like far. Like she could honestly make a deep run, and she could honestly win the season if she plays her cards right. It's just a matter of her getting out her bigger threats. Right now, she's just not aligned with the most people, and she's not exactly in the safest position. She's in a safe position for sure, but in terms of like longevity, she could definitely be targeted by people within her own alliance, which definitely does spell bad news for her. But as it stands right now, she's in a great position, and I really can't imagine her going home anytime soon, which is why I have her here at number 3. At number 2, I have the surviving nominee from week 1. I have Avery. And Avery is in a really good position. Despite being on the block week 1 as a pawn, which is never a good position to be in because it robs you of all of your social capital and it basically forces you to campaign from the bottom, she somehow managed to find herself in a really good position. I think her approach of going to Anthony and Victoria and prompting herself up as the third wheel to their bicycle, or the third wheel to their duo, and basically saying that she's willing to fall on that sword when push comes to shove, and she's willing to lose to them. Like, her propping herself up as that really built great social capital with her, despite her putting herself in a very vulnerable position. She has really good connections with a lot of the people in the house. I know I said that with Lexus and Kayla, but I think Avery's doing it much better than both of them. Like, we're shown that Avery has really solid connections with people who are very on the bottom, like Tola and Elijah, and that is going to spell great for her in the future. She has really solid bonds with both Anthony and Victoria, both as a duo and individually. So if she can capitalize on those in the future, she's going to be in a great position. My only fear is that she could be playing both sides. She could be caught in the crosshairs, and she could get targeted for maybe playing too hard. But I really don't see that happening like anytime soon. Like, Avery is in such a good position, it's almost astonishing. The only reason why I don't have her as number 1 is because she's not in direct control of a lot of the action going on within the house. Sure, she's in a really safe position, but she's not necessarily the one dictating the action. She's not the one calling the shots. She's not the one really influencing anything that's going on within the house. She's just in a pretty safe position. And while that's good for her now, she's going to need to put herself in a power position in the future, which I fully believe she can do, but she's just not in that position right now, which is why I have to keep her here at number 2. At number 1, the person I believe to be in the best position in the house so far is Victoria. And I am thoroughly impressed by Victoria. Like, coming onto the season, I thought Victoria was gonna flame out. I thought she was going to play too hard, too fast, get caught in the crosshairs, and then be like taken out, similar to how she was in BB Can 9. But she is thoroughly impressing me this season. Like, she still has elements of her messy gameplay in that she is the one spilling secrets, but she's doing it a lot more tactically this season. Like, she's not getting caught for any of her actions when she should be. Like, rightfully so, she should be getting caught for the things that she's doing, right? I feel like there's some sort of like revisionist history or some sort of mist Victoria has on the house, like with her saying that she wants to align with all of the women and get all the women to the end. When on her original season, both of the times she was HOH, she targeted women and she wanted to actively work with a lot of the men in power. People like Jed and Ty, and I think even Kiefer to a certain extent. Now, full disclosure, I haven't watched Big Brother Canada 9 in a minute, so I could be misremembering some information, and if I am, please disregard what I am saying about like how Victoria was like targeting women in the past. But if there is that revisionist history going on within the house this season, she's doing a great job at misting everybody into believing her. Like, she should be the one suspected of leaking information. Like, the fact that the Big Sisters Alliance got leaked and nobody thought it was Victoria, despite Victoria being very close to Anthony, it's very impressive gameplay on her end. Like, she is thoroughly, like, I have to give her a round of applause. Like, she is absolutely killing it. Like, logically, it makes sense that Victoria is the one leaking information. She's coming into this house in a minority and being only one of 2 veterans in a house of mostly newbies. Yet, nobody would even suspect her of telling Anthony any information because of how well she's separating herself from Anthony. Like, the way she talks about Anthony and saying that, oh, I didn't know, and I tried getting to him, and I tried talking game with him, but, like, I couldn't. Like, the way Victoria is separating herself from Anthony is impressive, and it is doing her game dividends. Like, it is paying off so well. She is so well positioned, and if she does win this next HOH, she has a very easy week ahead of her that could just really solidify all of the alliances, all of the allegiances she has. It really solidifies everything for her. And as long as she can maintain her cover without all of it blowing up, she is primed to do well this season. And I see her going very far, much further than 9th place, like on her original season. With all of that positive in mind and the really strong position she has, I have to put her here at number 1. Overall, this house is being ran by the women. Usually whenever the women try and come together to form an all-women's alliance, it usually falls apart because one of the women leaks the alliance, and then the women end up being catty towards one another and they end up targeting each other. And to be fair, that is happening to a smaller extent on this season, but the guys on this cast are such absolute duds that these women are just running circles around them. Like, they are absolutely killing the game right now. And it might be too early to call this, but I fully see a woman winning this season. I really don't see any of the guys outside of like maybe Anthony coming home with the W this season. I really don't see it. I think one of the women is going to be going home as the winner of Big Brother Canada 12. They are just doing so well in building alliances with one another and putting themselves in really solid positions, whereas the men are kind of just like sitting back and chilling and not really doing anything. And it's gonna show in the future that they should have been playing harder. And it's really unfortunate for the men, but I love seeing it for the women. Like, for so many seasons, we've seen these all-guy alliances just absolutely dominate everything because they just win all the competitions and stuff like that, and they hold all the power. But now we're really seeing the women step up and put themselves in the power position, and I love seeing it. I absolutely love it, and I hope that they continue this steamroll in the entertaining way that they are, because even though they are in that power position, there is still a lot of cracks, there's still a lot of game to be exposed, and there's still a lot of messiness and drama and fights that are just waiting to happen, and I absolutely cannot wait for it to happen. But that's the end of this video. Be sure to leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share with your friends if you have any of those, and I'll see you all in the next video. Peace.